He went undercover just to check on customer service. But what he heard that cashier say about an old man, it changed everything. Welcome to Johnny Boy Storytime. If you love stories where justice is served and the good guys win, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep the stories coming. Jacob Foster adjusted the collar of his faded denim jacket and glanced at his reflection in the dusty rearview mirror of his rental car. Gone was the sharply dressed CEO known across the retail industry for revolutionizing affordable living. In his place stood a weathered man in his late 40s, sporting a short beard, worn sneakers, and a tattered gray hoodie that smelled faintly of gasoline from his morning pit stop. It had been years since Jacob had stepped foot in one of his stores without being surrounded by regional managers, PR staff, or a film crew for another feel-good internal promo. But something had been gnawing at him for weeks. Despite glowing quarterly earnings and optimistic investor calls, a steady trickle of concerning employee exit interviews and unverified customer complaints had piled up in his inbox. Most troubling were the handwritten letters, mailed anonymously, describing mistreatment, fear, and even humiliation at the hands of a specific store manager and his favored cashiers at store number 49, located in a quiet, working-class suburb 2 hours from headquarters. With no cameras, no announcements, and no filters, Jacob decided to go see for himself. The moment he pushed through the glass doors of store number 49, a chime sounded above him. No one looked up. The air carried the sterile scent of cheap floor cleaner mixed with popcorn from a cart near the back. Rows of neatly stacked detergent bottles gleamed beneath flickering fluorescent lights, and the checkout lanes buzzed quietly with the beeps of scanned items. Jacob took a deep breath and grabbed a small basket, trying to walk like someone invisible. He wandered the aisles slowly, scanning faces. A teenager stocking shelves glanced at him with glazed indifference before returning to his task. Near the end of aisle 7, he noticed the employee name tags, bright red plastic clipped to fading blue polos. The cashiers at the front were chatting between customers, one leaning casually against the counter with his arms crossed. Jacob drifted closer. That's when he first heard it. "Watch this," one cashier, a lanky young man with slicked back hair and the name Zach on his tag, murmured to the girl beside him, a cashier named Lily. A hunched elderly man, wearing an oversized coat and holding a dented tin of canned soup and a loaf of bread, shuffled toward the register. Zach didn't smile. Instead, he rolled his eyes and said loudly, "Here comes our favorite freeloader again. But he tries to pay with nickels and a sad story." Lily stifled a laugh. "Seriously, why doesn't this guy just go to the food bank already?" Jacob's grip on his basket tightened, heart thudding. The man, likely in his 70s, with shaking hands and cloudy eyes, clearly heard the comment. His face fell as he approached the register, but said nothing. Zach scanned the items slowly, tapping the keypad dramatically. "That'll be $6.13, champ." The man fumbled with his wallet. A few coins clinked on a counter. Zach raised his eyebrows. "We taking donations now, or what?" Jacob stepped closer, feigning curiosity about the candy rack while every instinct in him screamed to intervene. The old man's fingers trembled as he counted out a crumpled $5 bill and some change. "It's all I have," he said, his voice barely audible. Zach let the silence hang before finally snatching the money, smirking. "Guess I'm covering the rest," he muttered mockingly, tossing the remaining few cents into a tip jar. Lily glanced at the line forming and said, "Next," dismissively. The man took his bag, eyes on the floor, and shuffled away without another word. Jacob watched him leave, his chest tight with anger and disbelief. This cruelty, this mockery, was happening in one of his stores. As Jacob stood there, motionless, he noticed something else. The customers who had witnessed the moment looked away awkwardly. No one said anything. The atmosphere wasn't just apathetic, it was complicit. People were too used to the abuse to be shocked. Jacob followed the elderly man out of the store at a distance, watching as he walked to the edge of the parking lot, settled onto a bench near the bus stop, and slowly began to eat the bread from the bag. Not a sandwich, just the bread. Alone in the cold. Jacob returned to the store seething, but composed. He wasn't going to blow his cover. Not yet. Instead, He wandered deeper into the store, passing by employees who avoided eye contact or chatted among themselves while customers searched in vain for help. Near the back, Jacob found a young stock associate named Amy kneeling beside a display of canned goods. She was quietly helping an elderly woman find a low-sodium soup brand, smiling gently and offering alternatives. Jacob noticed the stark contrast. Amy's kindness was real. It reminded him of why he started the company in the first place: to serve the people, to build community, to provide dignity, not just discounts. He made a mental note of her name. For the next hour, Jacob observed every corner of the store. The manager, a man named Brent, emerged from the back office just once, only to berate an employee for not rotating the promotional signage. Brent was loud, aggressive, and spoke as if he were scolding children. Not once did he acknowledge the customers or step in to assist. Zach and Lily, meanwhile, continued their banter at the front, mocking other customers under their breath, especially those with visible disabilities, stuttering speech, or worn clothing. It was a circus of arrogance enabled by leadership apathy. And Jacob had seen enough. As closing time approached, Jacob grabbed a few random items and stepped into Lily's checkout line. She didn't recognize him. "Find everything okay?" she asked flatly. "Chewing gum." "Sure did," Jacob replied, meeting her gaze with a calm that masked the storm brewing beneath. As she scanned his items, Zach appeared behind her, laughing about a customer who'd smelled like wet newspaper. Jacob didn't speak. He just paid and left. Back in his car, he sat in silence, watching through the windshield as the store's lights dimmed. He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. "Cheryl," he said quietly, "cancel tomorrow's meetings. I'll be at store 49 all day. Don't ask. Just clear my schedule. And send me everything you've got on this location: employee files, complaint logs, manager performance reviews. All of it. Also, get me in touch with legal. I'm going to need surveillance approvals fast." There was a long pause on the other end. "Understood," Cheryl said, and hung up. Jacob leaned back in his seat and stared at the glowing sign above the store: Foster and Company. Home Essentials. His name, his promise, being tarnished by people who treated the vulnerable like burdens. This wasn't just about retraining a team or replacing a manager. It was personal. Tomorrow, Jacob wasn't coming back as a customer. He was coming back as the reckoning. Michael Carter returned to the diner the very next day, the weight of what he had seen and heard the day before still pressing heavily on his shoulders like a vice. He wore the same faded jeans, fraying flannel shirt, and the worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, maintaining the anonymity that had become his armor in this twisted new reality. As he stepped through the door during the mid-afternoon lull, the scent of sizzling burgers and coffee brewing hit him, but unlike before, it offered no comfort, only a reminder of the facade that had hidden the truth from him for far too long. He chose a booth tucked in the corner, one with a clear view of the counter and the dish window, where he could quietly observe the interactions that would no longer escape his attention. Henry was already working, his frail frame moving a touch slower than yesterday, wincing occasionally when he thought no one was watching. Despite his clear physical pain, the elderly man worked with quiet dedication, cleaning up a spilled soda near a family's table and helping a little boy retrieve a dropped toy without hesitation. But Michael's focus today wasn't just on Henry. It was on the two people he now knew to be wolves in sheep's clothing. Megan and Troy were on shift again, their heads bent together at the register whenever the pace slowed, whispering in tones that made Michael's stomach churn. He ordered only coffee and pie, not wanting to engage more than necessary, and buried his face behind a newspaper as a ruse while his ears strained to pick up every word. "He's here again," Megan whispered, glancing toward Henry, probably looking for another charity case. Troy snorted. "Let him. We'll just make it easier to pin this all on him." The callousness in their voices made Michael's jaw tighten. He'd suspected manipulation yesterday, but now he saw it for what it truly was: an orchestrated effort to destroy a man who had only ever given. "You sure she's doing inventory tomorrow?" Troy asked, his tone laced with calculation. "Positive," Megan replied. "Patricia will be laser-focused on the cash counts. All we have to do is make sure the drawer's off again, and that Henry's conveniently nearby." Michael's hands clenched around the edges of his newspaper as the true scope of their plot came into focus. They weren't just taking advantage of Henry's kindness. They were actively setting him up to take the fall for their theft. "I've got my cousin lined up for the job," Troy added with a smirk. "Kid's fast, clean-cut, none of that old man sympathy crap. Once Henry's out, he's in, and we split the referral bonus." Megan leaned in closer, her voice a hiss of malice. "And we won't have to hear customers fawning over him anymore." "Oh, Henry, you're so sweet. Please." Makes me want to gag. Michael's stomach turned, not just from rage, but from guilt. Guilt that these people had thrived under his roof, wearing his brand, on his dime, spreading rot through what was supposed to be a place of dignity and warmth. Just then, a customer approached the register. Amy, the same single mother Henry had helped yesterday. Her kids clung to her legs as she nervously pulled out her wallet, counting change. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought I had enough. I'm about 15 short." Megan rolled her eyes dramatically and called out loud enough for half the diner to hear. "Henry, your charity case is back." The jab echoed like a gunshot across the room, and Michael watched in horror as Amy's face turned crimson with shame. Henry dried his hands and shuffled over, his expression gentle even as the humiliation washed over him. "It's all right, Amy," he said softly, slipping a few bills from his pocket and pressing them into her hand. "Summer break's tough. The kid's doing okay." His kindness cut through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. And for a moment, Amy smiled, the weight of embarrassment replaced by gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll pay you back next week." "No rush," Henry replied. "Just keep doing your best." As she left with her children, Michael saw the smug satisfaction on Troy's face as he leaned toward Megan and muttered, "That's another 15 to vanish before inventory." Megan smirked. "Perfect. We'll be rid of him in no time." Michael had heard enough. He stepped outside, his mind racing as fast as his heart, and dialed a contact from corporate security, someone he trusted. "I need surveillance footage, real-time audio, hidden cameras. Everything." Within the hour, arrangements were made for discreet installation the following morning before opening. But before he left, Michael did one more thing. He approached a regular, Ron, the retired mechanic who always sat by the window with his crossword. "You've known Henry a while, right?" Michael asked, still playing the part of a curious customer. Ron looked up. "Since Martha passed. He started working here just to stay busy, I think, but he's become the heart of this place." "He ever mentioned family?" Michael asked. Ron nodded. "A daughter in Seattle. She wants him to move in, but he's too proud. Says he's got a purpose here. Sent her happy photos from the diner. Never tells her how bad things really are." Michael swallowed hard, guilt tightening like a noose around his neck. "He's not doing well, is he?" Ron shook his head. "Sleeps in that old Buick sometimes when his trailer gets too cold. But he still gives, still helps anyone who needs it. You don't find men like that anymore." That night, Michael didn't sleep. He paced his hotel room, reviewed what he'd heard, and finalized a plan. He would not allow another day to pass with Henry standing at the edge of a trap designed by cowards. The cameras would be up by morning, and when Patricia did her inventory, the final act of Megan and Troy's performance would be caught in high definition. But the resolution he envisioned went far beyond exposing the guilty. He would repair what was broken, rebuild what had been tarnished. The dawn would bring reckoning, but it would also bring redemption, not just for Henry, but for the business Michael had once built with pride and lost to distance. And for the first time in years, he would reclaim it from the inside out. Michael Carter returned to his flagship diner before sunrise the next morning, the cool pre-dawn air biting through his old jacket as he parked across the street once more. Inside, the diner's neon sign flickered softly, casting a faint glow over the quiet lot like a fading heartbeat. A once vibrant pulse now dulled by a sickness he was only beginning to understand. The bitter taste of yesterday's revelations still lingered on his tongue, the words of Troy and Megan echoing like gunshots in his mind. Their cruel laughter, their calculated scheme to frame an elderly man who had done nothing but give. Those moments haunted Michael. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Henry's bewildered face when he was subtly accused, the hurt hidden behind his tired eyes, the way he had simply bowed his head and accepted humiliation as if it were something he had grown used to. That image enraged Michael more than anything he'd witnessed in his years in business. Today, however, would not be like the last. This morning, he wasn't just observing. He was hunting for truth. Clutching a small notebook, Michael entered the diner through the front entrance again, wearing the same disguise, frayed jeans, the ball cap low over his brow, and the stubble he hadn't bothered shaving. The regulars were just beginning to trickle in. A retired schoolteacher who always ordered oatmeal with honey, a delivery driver who downed black coffee like water, and a young couple who came every Friday before their shifts at the nearby clinic. Henry was already there, of course. He always was. This morning, he moved a bit slower, his back stiffer, his steps a fraction heavier. But his smile was the same. Tired, yes, but unbreakably kind. He greeted the first customers by name, poured coffee when a waitress lagged, and even helped an elderly woman with her coat as she arrived. He was doing more than his job. He was holding the place together with nothing more than habit and heart. Michael settled into the same booth and watched as the day unfolded, his pen scratching notes in silence. His eyes flicked from Henry to the others. Troy arrived 15 minutes late, looking disheveled and unapologetic. Megan was already on the floor, her sugary voice painting over an undercurrent of snide sarcasm. They exchanged a look when they saw Henry, calculated cold. As the morning grew busier, their plan began to unfold with chilling precision. Michael observed as Megan voided a legitimate order after the customers left, slipping the receipt under the counter like it had never existed. Troy deliberately handed back incorrect change to a customer who didn't notice, pocketing the difference with a casual shrug. Megan would then loudly mention discrepancies at the register to Patricia, the overworked manager who was too distracted by her own duties to investigate deeply. It was subtle, almost elegant in its cruelty. But to Michael's trained eye, it was unmistakable. And worse, Henry didn't notice. Or perhaps he did and said nothing, as if quietly enduring was easier than confronting those half his age who had already decided he was disposable. Late in the morning, a new opportunity presented itself. A woman named Amy walked in. Michael recognized her from the day before. She had two small children in tow, her clothes clean but worn, and her eyes marked by the exhaustion only single mothers knew. Henry lit up when he saw her and waved gently. The children smiled and rushed to greet him with the comfort of familiarity. "Morning, sweetheart," Henry said, handing one of the kids a wrapped muffin from behind the counter. Amy hesitated at the register, pulling coins from her wallet with shaking hands. "I think I'm a few dollars short," she said softly. "I can come back later." Megan's lips curled, not kindly. "We're not a charity," she replied, her voice sharp. "You can't order what you can't pay for." Before the humiliation could deepen, Henry stepped in. "I've got it," he said, quietly and simply, slipping a $5 bill from his wallet without hesitation. "Kids need breakfast before school." Amy looked at him with glassy eyes. "I'll pay you back next week, I promise." Henry waved her off. "Pay it forward." Michael's stomach twisted, not at Henry's gesture, but what came next. Troy leaned over to Megan, whispering, "Perfect. That's $5 more. He can't explain when the drawer comes up light. Let him hang himself." Megan giggled behind her hand. They were using Henry's kindness against him, turning his generosity into evidence for their fabricated crime. Michael's hand clenched around his pen so tightly it snapped. No more watching. No more waiting. It was time to act. He stepped outside, pulled out his phone, and called a contact at his security firm. "I need eyes on Register 1, he said flatly. Discreetly. Audio and video. Hidden. No one can know, especially not the staff. I'll have someone from corporate swing by today under the guise of an inspection. Make it happen." An hour later, a technician disguised as an espresso machine repairman arrived and went straight to the back room. Within 15 minutes, new cameras were activated and pointed discreetly at the registers and dishwashing station. Audio capture included. The next time someone tried to orchestrate a lie, they'd be caught in crystal clarity. Back inside, Michael resumed his seat. He saw Henry wiping down counters that weren't even in his section. Connor, a quiet young cook who often stayed out of the drama, passed Henry a water bottle and said something Michael couldn't hear, but Henry smiled in return. There was still decency in this place, still something worth saving, but not if Troy and Megan had their way. As the lunch rush approached, their tactics escalated. Megan deliberately miskeyed another transaction, causing an overcharge that the customer caught and questioned. She blamed it on the register and pretended to refund the difference. Michael watched her pocket the cash. This time, though, the camera watched too. Patricia walked by and noticed the drawer light on again. "Short again?" she asked, frowning. Troy stepped in with practiced sincerity. "Yep, it's got to be Henry. He was by the register just before this." Megan chimed in. "He's always offering to help, but maybe he's helping himself too." Michael stared at them, rage boiling just beneath the surface. These two weren't just malicious, they were bold. Confident no one would challenge their narrative. Confident that no one valued Henry enough to defend him. And perhaps they were right. Until now. As the diner's tempo slowed after the midday rush, Michael approached a regular named Ron who had spoken highly of Henry the day before. "Mind if I ask you something?" Michael said, keeping his tone light. "What do you know about Henry's situation?" Ron, a large man with the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much and still had room for compassion, leaned forward. "Henry's been through hell. Lost his wife to cancer. Used every penny they had to try and save her. Now he lives out back in an old trailer, sends money to his daughter so she doesn't worry. You ask me, that man's a damn saint. This place wouldn't function without him." Michael nodded. "What about the rest of the staff?" Ron's expression darkened. "Most are fine, but those two, they treat him like dirt. Talk about him behind his back. Call him names. He just takes it, keeps his head down. I've told Patricia, but she's always too busy. Corporate doesn't care." Michael's lips thinned. Corporate cares now. By the end of the day, Michael had pages of notes, a full catalog of observed thefts, audio evidence rolling, and testimony from 2 different customers and a cook who had quietly vouched for Henry. The noose was tightening, not around Henry's neck, but the two who had crafted this web of cruelty. And still, Henry worked, wiping tables long after others had clocked out, fixing the jammed napkin dispenser without being asked, offering the last slice of pie to a teenager who'd waited patiently for his order. He never asked for thanks, never expected praise. He simply did what he believed was right. As Michael stepped out into the cooling twilight, he looked back one last time. Through the diner window, he saw Henry adjusting a crooked picture on the wall, one of the original grand opening photos. In the corner of the frame was a young Michael Carter, grinning and proud. He had forgotten that version of himself, forgotten why he started this in the first place. But watching Henry straighten that photo, as if reminding him of who he was meant to be, Michael remembered. And tomorrow, he would remind everyone else too. Michael barely slept that night. The image of Henry's confused, devastated face as he was publicly accused and fired haunted him, replaying in his mind like a bad dream on repeat. The pain etched into the old man's features wasn't just heartbreak, it was betrayal. And not by strangers, but by people he trusted. The kind of betrayal that cut deeper than any financial setback ever could. Michael paced his study into the early hours of the morning, staring out at the city skyline with cold determination. This wasn't just about Henry anymore. It was about what kind of company he had built, what values had been allowed to rot, and what kind of culture had quietly festered under his nose. Somewhere along the line, Carter's Diner had become a place where the most decent man on staff could be framed without question, where whispers replaced truth and convenience replaced justice. Michael knew he had to act swiftly, not only to exonerate Henry, but to rip out the disease at the root. At 5:30 a.m., before the sun had even stretched over the horizon, Michael arrived at the diner in his true form. Not as the ragged man in worn flannel and jeans, but as the CEO of the entire franchise. Tailored suit, clean shave, crisp demeanor. This time, no disguise, no pretense. Today was not about hiding. It was about leading. Armed with surveillance footage, testimony from a few quietly loyal staff members, and his unwavering resolve, Michael met with his legal team at the location's parking lot. They reviewed the tapes one final time. The incriminating audio from Troy and Megan whispering about setting Henry up, the precise moments when register thefts occurred, the patterns of manipulation. The evidence was airtight. Even Patricia, the location's manager, who had naively followed along with Troy and Megan's suspicions, would be held accountable. This had become an infection that spread beyond negligence. It was a willful disregard for fairness and human decency. And it was time for the cure. At 9 a.m. sharp, Michael entered the diner's staff-only back room, startling Patricia mid-coffee sip. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, not in disbelief, but in dread. "Mr. Carter?" she stammered, nearly dropping her mug. "What were you doing here?" Michael didn't bother with pleasantries. "Gather everyone. Now." His voice wasn't raised, but the authority in his tone left no room for questioning. Patricia scurried to comply, confusion morphing into anxiety. Within minutes, the full morning crew assembled in the kitchen. Megan included, her posture suddenly more rigid than usual, and Troy arriving just behind her, cocky as ever, unaware that the noose he'd tied for someone else was about to snap shut around his own neck. Michael waited until all eyes were on him. The kitchen was so silent. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead seemed deafening. "Some of you know me. Some of you don't. I'm Michael Carter," he began slowly. "I built this company with a belief that a workplace should be built on integrity, compassion, and respect. But over the past few days, I've witnessed something that stands in direct opposition to those values." He paused to let the words settle. "I've been watching, listening, recording. Every lie, every whisper, every cruel comment made behind the backs of the hardworking staff who carry this place." Troy shifted uncomfortably. Megan's face went pale. "I know about the plan to frame Henry. I know about the stolen money. And I know about the two people behind it." The room froze. Even the dishwasher stopped spraying. Megan let out a strangled gasp. "This is insane," she protested, her voice trembling. "You can't just accuse us without." Michael cut her off by raising a hand. "I can, and I will." With that, he turned toward a cart he had wheeled in earlier. Atop it sat a laptop, already connected to a small speaker and monitor. With the click of a button, the kitchen filled with the unmistakable voice of Troy, clear as day. "If we frame Henry for stealing, Patricia will have to fire him. Then I could bring in my cousin. We split the referral bonus." Murmurs of disbelief spread through the staff. Megan's voice followed shortly after in the recording. "No more pathetic old man bringing everyone down. I'm sick of watching him shuffle around like a charity case." The color drained from Megan's face as gasps echoed through the room. One of the junior waitresses clapped a hand to her mouth. Connor, who had stayed silent until now, stepped forward. I knew something was off, but I didn't know it was this bad." Patricia's face had gone completely slack. "I had no idea," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought you didn't think," Michael replied coldly. "You acted without investigating. You listened to the loudest voices, not the most loyal ones." He turned back to Megan and Troy. "You're both terminated, effective immediately. And I've already spoken with law enforcement. Expect to be contacted." Megan collapsed onto a stool, burying her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically. Troy remained frozen, jaw clenched, staring blankly at the screen as though it could undo his fate. Michael wasn't finished. But this isn't just about removing toxic employees. This is about rebuilding what was broken. Starting today, this location is under direct review. I'll be here, hands-on, every shift, every corner. He looked at the remaining staff, many of whom had been complicit through silence. If you've been silent, this is your chance to speak. If you've been complicit, this is your chance to take responsibility. And if you've been quietly doing the right thing, your time is coming. His eyes landed on Connor. People like Connor, who stepped up when it wasn't easy. And people like Henry, who should never have had to prove their worth in the first place. As Troy and Megan were escorted out by corporate security, faces flushed with shame, heads bowed, Michael looked around the stunned room. The mood was heavy with the weight of reckoning. No one cheered. No one clapped. This wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a wake-up call. And Michael was far from finished. He addressed the room once more, but this time his tone softened. We're not perfect, but we can be better. And we will be. I promise you that. The staff, still stunned, watched as Michael walked out of the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, headed straight toward the dish pit. Without hesitation, he grabbed an apron and started scrubbing the backlog of dishes Henry would have done without complaint. Connor, eyes wide, hurried to help. Sir, you don't have to, I do, Michael replied simply. Because real leadership doesn't sit in an office while people suffer. It gets its hands dirty. And from now on, that's exactly what we're going to do. The morning after Megan and Troy's public firing and the explosive revelation of their scheme, Carter's diner sat in a strange limbo, a place once clouded by quiet tension, now flushed with unease, expectation, and something it hadn't seen in months: hope. Michael Carter had made his intentions clear. This wasn't a one-time appearance. It was the start of a transformation. But there was one thing still missing. One man whose absence was louder than the noise of any kitchen rush. One presence that was felt in every glance toward the empty dish pit. Henry Lawson. Though the staff had spent years walking past Henry like he was part of the furniture, something had changed overnight. He had gone from invisible to irreplaceable. Not just because of what he did, but because of what he represented. Michael sat in the office reviewing staff files when he reached for his phone and dialed a number he'd been staring at since dawn. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hello. It was soft, hesitant, tired. Henry, Michael said, standing instinctively. It's Michael Carter. There was a pause on the other end. Then, gently, I figured you'd be calling. I saw the news. Of course he had. The footage had already made its way through staff group chats, and by morning, locals were buzzing about the two disgraced employees being escorted out of the diner in front of stunned patrons. Michael cleared his throat. Henry, I want to say, you don't need to apologize, Henry interrupted. You didn't accuse me. They did. His voice was calm, but undeniably weary. But you own the place, he added after a pause. And for a while, I thought maybe that meant something different. That stung more than any insult could. Michael leaned forward, elbows on the desk. It does. Or at least it should. And I'm going to prove it to you. But I can't do that without you here. There was a long silence. I'm not sure I can come back, Mr. Carter, Henry said finally. It's not pride. I'm tired. And I don't want to walk into a place where I'm seen as a problem. Or worse, a pity project. Michael's jaw tightened. Then let me fix that too. Not with words. With action. Come in today. Not as a dishwasher. Not even as an employee. Just come in, sit at a booth. Have a meal. On me. That's it. Another silence. Then a soft sigh. I'll think about it. By noon, the lunch crowd began to trickle in. The staff was tentative, navigating the shift without Megan's hostile energy or Troy's smug indifference. Connor, now temporarily leading the back of house, moved with focused confidence, trying his best to set a new tone. Patricia, still visibly shaken by her failure to spot the sabotage, worked double time at the front, assisting with orders and apologizing to customers for any delays. And Michael? He stood near the host stand, not as a figurehead, but as a second pair of hands, refilling coffee, clearing plates, helping bust tables. He wore no suit today, just slacks and a navy button-down rolled to the elbows. A silent reminder that rank didn't exempt anyone from real work. At exactly 12:43 p.m., the doorbell above the entrance chimed, and every head in the dining room turned as Henry stepped inside. He wore the same clothes he always did, a simple button-down tucked into faded slacks, his white hair combed neatly back. But something in his posture had changed. He wasn't shuffling in shame or reluctance. He stood tall, measured, as if this time he was in control of what happened next. Connor saw him first and immediately moved toward the host stand. Table for one, he asked, but the words came with a wide, disbelieving smile. Unless you're still willing to share a table with the help, Henry joked softly. Connor laughed and motioned him toward booth. Best seat in the house. Henry took the corner booth by the window, the same one Michael had sat in just days earlier, while secretly observing the diner's pulse. He didn't ask for anything fancy, just a grilled cheese and tomato soup, his usual when he treated himself. Patricia brought it herself, eyes misty as she laid down the plate. "It's good to see you, Henry." He simply nodded. "Thank you." From across the room, Michael watched as customers began to whisper and point, but not in a cruel way. A father leaned down to explain to his child who the man was. "That's Henry, the guy who helped that woman with the kids last week." A college student pulled out her phone, no doubt texting the news to someone. A couple near the kitchen sent over a piece of pie with a handwritten note. "Thank you for being kind when no one else was." Halfway through his meal, Michael approached the booth and gently asked, "Mind if I join you?" Henry shrugged, his mouth quirking slightly. "It's your diner." Michael slid into the seat across from him. "Not without people like you, it isn't." There was a pause before he continued. "I want to offer you a job back. But more than that, I want to offer you a new role. One with dignity, with respect, with authority. How would you feel about becoming director of staff culture and integrity? Full benefits, a livable wage, your own office, and the power to help make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else here again." Henry blinked. "That sounds like something for someone younger, or more educated." Michael shook his head. "It sounds like something for someone who knows what real leadership looks like. Someone who already lives the values we talk about in training videos but fail to practice. Someone like you." Across the dining room, the lunch rush continued, but everyone stole glances. The man they'd written off as just a dishwasher was having the most important meeting in the building. Henry said nothing for a long moment. Then he reached for his coffee and took a slow sip. "One condition," he said finally. Michael tilted his head. "Anything. I still get to help in the kitchen sometimes. I've got dish soap in my blood after all these years." Michael laughed. "Deal." By the time Henry stood up, the room burst into spontaneous applause. Customers, employees, even the cooks peeked out and clapped. It wasn't a stage performance. It was something real, something earned. Michael pulled Patricia aside and told her quietly that Henry would be returning in a leadership capacity and that she would now report directly to him regarding staff morale. To her credit, she didn't push back. She nodded and shook Henry's hand. "I look forward to learning from you," she said sincerely. Over the next several hours, Michael worked alongside Henry in the dish pit. On his first unofficial day as director, Henry chose to roll up his sleeves and scrub pans. "You learn a lot back here," he said, elbow deep in soap. "More than in any boardroom." Michael smiled, sweating beside him. "You're telling me." As word spread throughout the franchise about what had happened at the flagship location, emails flooded in from staff across the city, servers, cooks, janitors, sharing their own experiences, good and bad. Michael realized this wasn't just about saving one diner. It was about saving a culture. And thanks to Henry, he now had a blueprint. That evening, as the last customer left and the lights dimmed, Henry and Michael stood by the front window, watching the glow of the neon sign flicker against the parking lot. "You've given me more than a job," Henry said softly. "You've given me a chance to matter again." Michael turned to him. "You always mattered. I just finally showed up in time to see it." In the weeks that followed Henry Lawson's triumphant return to Carter's Diner as Director of Staff Culture and Integrity, the entire company, 13 locations strong, felt the tremors of change. But these weren't the chaotic rumblings of instability. No, this was the kind of shift that comes after an earthquake has leveled everything toxic and broken, making room for something new to be built, stronger, fairer, human. Michael Carter had once envisioned Carter's Diners as places of warmth, where working-class families could grab a good meal and where staff felt like family. Somewhere along the way, between investor meetings, quarterly goals, and the temptation to automate empathy into training modules, that vision had blurred. But now it was being redrawn, and this time in bold, permanent ink. The first step Michael took was public and personal. He released a video statement across all Carter's Diner social platforms, standing in the very booth where he once hid behind a newspaper and a cheap disguise. With Henry seated beside him, Michael addressed the world. "We failed one of the finest people to ever walk through these doors. We turned a blind eye to cruelty and let dignity be trampled for the sake of convenience. That ends today." The video went viral, not because of corporate polish or PR spin, but because it was raw, honest, and real. Henry's face, lined by time but bright with integrity, became a symbol, a reminder that every name tag has a story. That kindness, even when done quietly, deserves to echo. Internally, the overhaul was massive. Every location received mandatory surprise evaluations, done not by corporate managers, but by rotating empathy auditors, many of whom were former frontline employees like Henry. These auditors didn't care about upselling desserts or pushing loyalty cards. They cared about culture, about how the dishwasher was treated when the manager was stressed, about whether that single mom working double shifts got a break to call her kids, about whether dignity was still part of the uniform. Connor, who had stepped up in the darkest moments, was formally promoted to general manager of the flagship location. Under Henry's mentorship, he blossomed. His quiet confidence became infectious. Staff who had once clocked in just to survive now arrived early, swapping ideas, helping one another, and even organizing team outings. Megan, whose compassion had been buried under exhaustion and fear, now helped onboard new hires, sharing her story as both a warning and a lesson in redemption. It wasn't just about Troy and me, she told trainees. It was about forgetting that people aren't problems to fix, they're humans to support. Henry, true to his word, still spent part of his time in the kitchen, apron tied snugly over his business casual attire. "You hear everything in here," he'd say, as he scrubbed pans with new hires, listening to their worries and dreams. He turned the dish pit into a sanctuary, where laughter returned, where venting was allowed, and where everyone was reminded that no task was beneath anyone. But when not in the back, Henry was in the field, visiting other diners, speaking at town halls, consulting with HR, and reviewing disciplinary systems. He introduced an anonymous feedback hotline called the Lawson Line, a place where staff could report toxic behavior or even suggest improvements without fear of retaliation. Michael didn't just delegate and disappear. He spent every Friday rotating between diners, working one position each week: busser, line cook, cashier. It wasn't performative. He didn't post selfies. He just showed up, and the effect rippled. Regional managers, seeing their CEO shoulder trays and mop floors, followed suit. The corporate wall between leadership and labor thinned until it vanished. Trust began to rebuild, not because slogans changed, but because leadership showed up, rolled up sleeves, and asked, "How can we help you do your job better?" Financially, the company didn't just survive, it thrived. Word of mouth soared. Customers who once complained now raved. "It just feels different in there," one Yelp review read. "Like everyone actually wants to be there." Turnover dropped by 68% across all locations. Complaints about staff behavior plummeted. Sales? They jumped, not because of gimmicks or gimmicky campaigns, but because culture had finally aligned with mission. One afternoon, several months into the transformation, Michael invited Henry to join him for lunch. Not at the diner, but at the city council's annual business summit. Henry hesitated. "I'm not really a suits and ties kind of guy," he muttered. Michael smiled. "Then we'll both go in shirt sleeves." At the summit, Michael gave a keynote titled "Profit with Purpose." He introduced Henry not just as his director, but as the heart of his company. When Henry spoke, quietly, humbly, there wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. "You don't have to be a hero to change a business," he said. "You just have to remember that work isn't just about money. It's about how you leave people at the end of the day, tired or respected, used or seen." That night, they received a standing ovation. But for Henry, the real applause came later, when he returned home to his modest, new house 3 blocks from the diner and found a letter on his porch. It was from Amy, the young mother he'd once helped pay for a meal. Inside, a photo of her kids, now a little older, grinning in their school uniforms. And note, "I got the job. We're doing okay now. Thank you for giving us one more day to keep trying." Back at the diner, a new tradition began. Every month, employees across locations would nominate someone who embodied the values Henry had come to represent: kindness, quiet leadership, resilience. Winners received a small plaque, a bonus, and their name added to a growing wall in the flagship location, now renamed Henry's Hall. At the top of the wall, inscribed in bronze, was a quote Henry never meant to be remembered for, but that defined him all the same. Sometimes, all it takes is seeing someone when no one else does. As for Michael, his leadership style had forever changed. He no longer measured success in margin alone. He measured it in stability, in second chances, in whether his employees went home proud of how they'd been treated. He often sat in the booth by the window, the same place he had once watched injustice fester in silence, and smiled at how far they'd come. And so, Carter's Diner didn't just fix what was broken. It built something better from the rubble. A business once defined by silence and shadows now stood tall in the light, because one man refused to look away and another refused to stop giving, even when no one was watching.